I used to make long drives for work, deliveries between our main office and another branch 2 states over. It wasn't part of my job description exactly, but I liked the solitude, the sense of freedom on the open road. Sometimes I'd fly, but when there was equipment or company vehicles to move, I volunteered to drive. I didn't mind sleeping in cheap motels or in the back of the truck at a rest stop. It was quiet, peaceful. But one trip, though, changed how I felt about the road completely. That morning had already gone off schedule. A massive copier machine, one of those industrial ones that weigh more than a small car, was delayed for delivery. It didn't arrive until around 3 p.m., and by the time we got it loaded into the back of the box truck, it was already late. I figured I'd wait until after rush hour to leave, maybe hit the highway around 5. I told myself I'd make up the time later, that I'd drive straight through the night if I had to. The roads eventually cleared, and for a while the drive was uneventful, just the endless hum of the tires and the faint rattle of equipment behind me. Around midnight, I hit a stretch of highway that cut deep into rural country, the kind of place where gas stations were 20 miles apart and the radio only caught static. I stopped once for fuel and coffee. The cashier looked half asleep, barely glanced at me. It was the last stop before the state line, and I knew there was one final rest area before the long, empty stretch that led across the border. I figured I'd stop there to use the restroom and stretch my legs before pushing on. The rest stop looked almost deserted when I pulled in. The lights flickered slightly, buzzing with that faint electric hum that always makes places like that feel uncanny. There wasn't another car in sight. I parked near the restroom, stepped out, and felt the kind of cold that makes the back of your neck tense up. Inside, the bathroom smelled like bleach and stale water. I splashed some on my face to wake up. When I came out, I immediately noticed something. A pickup truck had pulled up right next to my box truck. It hadn't been there when I went in. A man was standing beside it, leaning casually against his door like he'd been waiting. He looked like he was in his late 30s, unshaven, wearing a baseball cap and a dark jacket. He gave a small nod when he saw me and smiled, not in a friendly way, but in that slow, measuring way that makes you feel watched. "Long night?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He glanced at my truck. "That yours?" "Yeah." "You having any trouble with it? Sounds like the engine might be rough." I froze a little. My truck hadn't made a sound since I parked it. I hadn't even turned it back on. Something about the way he asked that, like he already knew something was wrong. "No, runs fine," I said. He nodded again, that same slow smile, and said, "That's good. Hate to see someone stranded out here." I didn't respond. I just got in the cab, locked the door, and pulled away. My eyes stayed on the rearview mirror until the rest stoplights vanished behind me. For a while I tried to shake it off. Probably just some guy making awkward small talk, I told myself. But the road ahead only grew darker, the forest on either side pressing in tight. No cell signal, no houses, no traffic, just my headlights cutting through the void. Then, halfway across a bridge that stretched over a deep gorge, everything went black. Every single light on the truck, headlights, dashboard, brake lights, shut off in an instant. The hum of the engine remained, but the silence around me felt deafening. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I hit the brakes. Nothing. I looked behind me. Even the brake lights weren't glowing. I swore and slammed my fist against the dashboard, half out of frustration, half out of fear. And just like that, the lights flickered back on. Everything was working again. I laughed under my breath, but it didn't sound right. I didn't feel relief. I felt watched. There was nowhere to stop safely, so I drove another 10 miles until I saw a gas station sign glowing faintly ahead. I pulled in, my hands still shaking. As I stepped out to refuel, a cold realization hit me. The same pickup truck from the rest stop pulled in right after me. He didn't park at the pumps. He pulled off to the side, in the dark, engine still running. For a long second, I just stood there, holding the pump, pretending not to notice. My instincts were screaming at me to leave. Then, almost like divine timing, a police cruiser rolled into the lot. I waved the officer down, maybe a little too eagerly. We talked briefly, I mentioned my lights cutting out, and I casually pointed back toward the pickup. "That guy's been on my route since the last rest stop," I said. The officer nodded and drove off in that direction. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I finished fueling, got back in the truck, and drove toward the next town. I kept checking my mirrors. Every pair of headlights behind me made my stomach tighten. At one point, I swore I saw the same truck again. No lights this time, just a faint silhouette behind me for a few seconds before it disappeared into the dark. By the time I reached a motel, I was exhausted and paranoid. I checked in, parked the truck directly under a security light, double-checked the locks, and left the curtain slightly open so I could see the lot. I barely slept, maybe 30 minutes total. Every sound, a door slam, a car engine, jolted me awake. At sunrise, I checked out and left. The world felt normal again in daylight, almost like the night before had been a dream. When I got to the other office, I told them about the truck's electrical failure and asked them to have it checked. A few days later, after I'd flown home, I got a call from one of the mechanics. He said the truck was fine. No electrical problems, no wiring issues, nothing loose or damaged. It ran perfectly. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "We did find something weird, though," he said. "When we popped the hood, there was a small piece of cloth wedged near the engine bay. Looked like it was torn from a work glove." He paused. "Thing is, it was tucked in deep, like someone had been under there recently." I didn't respond. I just hung up, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone, remembering that man at the rest stop smiling at me, asking if I'd had any trouble with my truck. Since that night, I never stop at rest areas after dark anymore, and I never ignore my gut again. It was the summer of 1988, and I was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha. I was barely 20, young enough to believe the world still made sense, old enough to know that it usually didn't. My name's Zoe. My roommate's name was Tracy, and the girl we hung out with most weekends was Stacy. People used to laugh when they heard our names together. "You're making that up," they'd say, and we'd laugh right along with them. 3 girls, 3 names that sounded like a bad joke. We thought it was funny back then. That weekend, Stacy suggested we drive to Kansas City for a quick getaway. We didn't have much money, but we had youth, a full tank of gas, and a need to escape the gray routine of military life. So we packed a bag each, crammed into Stacy's old blue Pontiac, and hit the highway with the windows down and the radio blasting. For the first couple of hours, it was nothing but laughter, bad singing, and the occasional argument about what song to play next. The world outside blurred into open plains and miles of sky. It felt like freedom, but the mood shifted the second the red and blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror. "Shit," Stacy muttered, easing off the gas. She'd been driving a little too fast, I'll admit. We figured we'd get a ticket, maybe a lecture, nothing we couldn't handle. She pulled over, rolling down her window before the officer even reached us. He was tall, lean, and wore the kind of mirrored sunglasses that made it impossible to read a face. His badge caught the glare of the headlights. He leaned in, scanned each of us, then spoke quietly, too quietly. "I want you to follow me. Don't try to run off or you'll all be going to jail." Then he turned and walked back to his patrol car. We sat there for a second, staring at each other. "Why?" Tracy whispered. "Why wouldn't he just give you a ticket?" No one had an answer. When the patrol car started moving again, Stacy hesitated. "Do we follow him?" I looked around. The highway was empty, just us and him. "I think we have to," I said. We followed. He led us off the interstate about 15 minutes later, taking an exit I'd never noticed before, one that led straight into farmland. The sun was long gone, and the air outside was ink black except for the faint silver of the moon on the horizon. We drove in silence. The road narrowed, pavement giving way to gravel, then dirt. Cornfields rose on both sides, tall enough to swallow the car whole. Every bump, every rattle of the tires against loose stone made me grip the door tighter. "This doesn't feel right," Tracy murmured. "I know," I whispered. Stacy said nothing. She just kept following the cruiser's taillights as they cut a narrow red line through the dark. After a few miles, he turned down a smaller road, if you could even call it that, leading to an open clearing. A large, decaying barn stood there, its roof caved in, the siding eaten away by time. And in front of it, parked at odd angles like they'd been waiting, were several pickup trucks. When we stopped, figures stepped out of the barn, 4 or 5 men, all holding shotguns. My stomach dropped. The officer got out and walked back toward us, his boots crunching against the dirt. "Step out of the car," he said, looking straight at Stacy. Stacy froze. Why?" "Because I told you to." His tone was calm, too calm. She glanced at us, eyes wide and wet. "What do I do?" "Just go," I whispered. "We'll be right here." She got out slowly, her hands shaking as she followed him toward his patrol car. The men by the barn didn't speak. They just stood there, watching us through the dark. One of them spit into the dirt. Another rested his hand on the barrel of his shotgun. I reached over and grabbed Tracy's hand. Her skin was clammy. For what felt like hours, Stacy sat in that patrol car. The headlights from the cruiser lit the field in a cold, yellow glow. I couldn't see what was happening inside. I just saw movement. Her silhouette shifting, the officer leaning in. Tracy whispered a prayer under her breath. I joined her, the words tumbling out of me, barely audible over the pounding in my ears. And then the door opened. Stacy bolted. She ran back toward us, tears streaking her face, gasping for air. She threw herself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and fumbled for the keys. "We have to go," she sobbed. "What did he... Just go!" The officer was already walking toward us again, slow and deliberate, as if he knew we weren't going anywhere until he said so. He came to Tracy's window and leaned down. His face was stone. "Is it true you're all in the Air Force?" he asked. Tracy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, his reflection flickering in the glass. Then he said, "Get out of here. Go back to where you came from. I better not see you again." Stacy hit the gas before he even stepped away. The car spun gravel behind it as we tore back down the road. None of us spoke. Not until we hit the highway again. Only when the cornfields were gone and the glow of civilization returned did anyone make a sound. It was a sob, low and broken. Stacy pulled over just across the Nebraska state line, shut off the engine, and buried her face in her hands. Tracy and I tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't speak, not for several minutes. Finally, she lifted her head. Her voice was trembling. "He asked me what I was doing with 2..." She stopped, unable to say it. "He said if I wanted you two to stay out of jail, I'd have to do things for him." The car was silent except for her breathing. She told us that she broke down crying, begged him to just write the ticket. That was when he looked down at her ID and saw her military card. His whole demeanor changed. He asked if we were all military. She said, yes. He stared at her for a moment, then told her to go back to the car. I remember sitting there on the side of the road after she finished, my heart hollow. None of us spoke for a long time. The night was eerily quiet. Even the highway seemed empty. When we finally started driving again, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind, that empty dirt road, the barn, the men with guns. What would have happened if she hadn't had that ID? If we hadn't been wearing our uniforms earlier in the day? We never reported it. We were young, scared. And who would believe 3 teenage girls over a police officer and his friends? We went back to base the next morning, back to normal life. We never talked about it again. Not once. But even now, decades later, I can still see the flash of those headlights on the corn. I can still smell the dirt, feel the weight of those eyes watching us. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be driving down some lonely highway, and I'll see a patrol car pull onto the shoulder up ahead. And I still feel it, that cold, unmistakable dread, because that night I learned something I never forgot. Not all monsters hide in the dark. Somewhere a badge,